Hello, and welcome once again to Family Historian. My name is Stephen Conti. Tonight we're going to feature one of the best genealogy libraries in New Jersey, the North Jersey History and Genealogy Center at the Morris Township Public Library, and guess where? Morristown, New Jersey. And joining me on tonight's show, I am very honored to have as my guest a very smart man. His name is, and we'll say it in unison,
Chad Lineweaver.
Lineweaver. Okay, Chad is the director of the entire library there, so he really knows his stuff. And on tonight's show, Chad is going to tell us about the abundance of wonderful sources that are available for the genealogist. And now let's welcome Chad. Chad, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Stephen. So nice to be here. I appreciate it.
Great. You know, I really meant what I said about your library. I have been going there for years when it was upstairs on the balcony. They put us genies on the balcony.
That's
now
right.
We're in the basement, okay?
Well, yeah, it's a step above a little bit. Yeah.
Right. But your office is on the balcony now.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah, the original 1917 wing, yes.
Okay, fine. And it's a wonderful facility. And we have some photos to show you of the actual genealogy library, which is overlooked by a young man, James
Lewis.
James Lewis. So
Yep.
it's you and then James and then the rest of the staff. Am I right on
Correct.
that? Okay. The first source I want to talk about, Chad, are the Census Records, the most popular source that we genies use. And you have both the federal census for the whole nation and also the state census. We in New Jersey are very lucky because we have a state census going from 1855 to
1915, I think?
1915, right.
Yep.
And we have some visuals showing you this. Now, you said something very interesting about the New Jersey Federal Population Census. You corrected me on this one.
I can't believe I did that, but yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think the thing that the census is such a basic area for a lot of people to start because you can get a lot of information very quickly. The problem with New Jersey is there is no 1790, 1800, 1810, or 1820 census. It all was burned.
Yeah.
So a lot of people can't start that early on within the census. But if you're just getting started and you're in 1950, 1940, you can invariably think of a grandparent or somebody that you can easily look up and get started and get a lot of information quickly. And we have access to census, certainly on microfilm, but everybody uses some sort of online database now, either at home, but also in our library too. So we offer a lot of those so people can find them quickly.
Also, the 1890s census, federal population. What happened to that one?
Yeah, that burned as well. I think it burned in the State Department, if I remember correctly, in D.C. Sometime years back. I think there's a portion of Hudson County in New Jersey that exists for 1890. But
Jersey City.
Right.
Right.
But other than that, I think you can only get non-population schedules for that census.
Right. Now, what I have used at your library are the vertical files. Tell our viewers what a vertical file is and how to get to them.
Sure. So vertical files are kind of like a bit of a hodgepodge of a lot of things. So let's say you came in and researched at the library for a little bit and you have a little bit of information on the Conti family and you wanted to give that information to us. We would probably create a Conti family file and put it in the vertical files for other people to find.
Right.
If we find an obituary in the Daily Record or on the Morristown Green or in the Star Ledger, we might copy that and put that, maybe if it's somebody really well known, we may put it in their own file. If it's maybe like a politician or a well-known minister or something like that, or we may create a family file there as well because it'll list, obviously the obit will list related people.
Yeah. Now, does your library, it doesn't really concentrate on, well, it does, but not always, Morris County families, or are there other families from New Jersey or other states?
The best way to sort of think about it is that probably first and foremost we're concentrating on the greater Morris Township area.
Right.
But beyond that, there's a lot of families that sort of came in through and around, stuff like that. So secondary is sort of like Morris County in general, but even all of northern New Jersey. And once you get further back, even like a lot of the colonial states.
Right.
So a lot of times there's just links between all those things that we'll keep information on, whether it may be a secondary publication, something is out in print, or it's a database that might be on that we subscribe to.
Because I don't want people to say, well, I don't come from a Morris County family. Why would I go to that library? No, I found a lot of ethnic genealogical sources at your library.
Right.
Italian, German, Irish, okay, and Native American and African American sources there.
Yeah,
now, go on, you go.
I was going to say that there were African American families in the Morristown area, like very early.
Yes.
Pre-Civil War.
Right.
And there are remnants of those families still around today. And a lot of people have done research on those.
Yes.
And we'll have, like going back to the vertical files, we'll have family files on some of those. We had interviews. There are a lot of interviews that are on our YouTube page with a lot of people that have information as well. So you're absolutely right. You don't know what you're going to stumble upon.
Right. Getting back to the vertical files, you also have a wonderful collection of early photographs, not only of Morristown, but of Morris County. And we have a few to show you. Do you also have old postcards?
We do.
From the area.
We have a lot of older postcards. We had a collection of a photographer that he gave us his whole entire collection of photographs. So that's why you get a much wider swath of Morris County, because he was hired as a photographer to shoot an accident or to shoot a conference or something like that, and we'd end up with those photographs.
Right.
So.
How about military records? You use a database there. Can you tell our viewers about the kinds of military records you would have?
Sure. There's a lot of published sources for military records, so you may find different kinds of books that either list different types of information or campaigns or things like that. Our staff over the years has also kept lists of people who served from Morristown or Morris Township in various wars, so we'll a lot of times have that. And then there's also a database that a lot of people use called Fold 3 that contains a lot of military information and ancestry as well. You can obviously search in there.
Right.
You may very well find like a service record or at least references to like a pension record or things like that. You can get a lot of information from that if the pension record's fairly robust.
Great. I know there was a very popular lady, I never met her unfortunately, Barbara Hoskins, who wrote about all of the men who served in the American Revolution from Morristown. And this is a printed source that you have at your library, I believe.
Yeah, and she also wrote a history of Morris Township. She worked for our library for a number of years and kind of really started what became our History Center collection.
Right. And the irony is that Barbara was not a Jersey girl. She did not have Jersey family. She was a Hoosier from Indiana.
Yeah. I'm not from New Jersey either, neither is James, who you mentioned earlier.
Right. So that's it for military records. Very good. Now, family papers. How do you obtain family papers? Do people donate them to you?
Largely, yeah. So a lot of times you may have somebody who is an established genealogist who will donate their research papers to us. That's usually very useful, particularly if they were researching a variety of families. Occasionally, sometimes you'll just have personal papers. It might be correspondence between people in the 19th century or earlier, things like that. But we kind of seek out things that we feel like are going to be useful to people who come and do research with us.
Right. Have you ever turned any materials down? Like
sometimes.
This is not for like what is your criteria for accepting materials?
Well, let's just say if I had somebody come in and they had like a collection on the history of an institution in Seattle, Washington, we're probably not the best place for that.
No.
So part of it's a geographic, right? So how much of it is related to people who expect what people expect us to have.
Right.
Some of it will be tied in with families that may have lived in the area and that type of thing as well. So even sometimes get people well-minded want to give us European-related records, but sometimes that isn't even, if it relates to a family that their descendant taps into, maybe, but we want to definitely like have it geared more toward, because it doesn't help anybody if we have Italian records of the Conti family that have no connection to this area whatsoever. It really should be in an area where people would expect to find it.
Right. Now, you also have an index to wills. Now, are these all new? I'm sure they're all New Jersey wills.
Concentrating on Morris County, but yes.
All right. And how do you obtain those, the New Jersey will? Do people have them in their possession?
So it's a mix of a couple of things. So in some of those family collections you were mentioning before, we sometimes will have copies of wills.
Right.
We have a legal collection that also has a series of references to wills of different families too. A lot of them, though, are referencing what's at the courthouse.
Right.
So we will have microfilm of some of those wills. The ones that are more recent are only at the courthouse, but sometimes even just the index can clue you into things that you're looking for.
Right. And we have a wonderful, whenever you go to a research library, they will have a companion pamphlet, and this will tell you all of the sources at the North Jersey History and Genealogy Center, which is in the basement of the Morris Township Public Library, and you guessed right, in Morristown, New Jersey. Right. So this will give you a list. Always pick up, these are wonderful to have. They will tell you what they have and what they don't have.
And that's also on our website too.
Right. You also have maps. Now, we use maps in genealogy that will designate land ownership of early families. Right. And you have many of these original maps, or?
We do. So it kind of falls in two categories. So on the one hand, when you first come into the History Center, on the right-hand side is a large wall map of Morristown that lists, it has individual houses and lists landowners around the whole area, I think in 1874.
Right.
So that's great. That was a published map that was relatively available at the time, and we have a lot of those types of maps for all over New Jersey. But we also have sometimes maps that were created, somebody did a survey of their property, somebody did a survey of multiple properties, or it was a hand-scratched map or whatever. So those are often one of a kind and don't exist anywhere else. So between the two, you can often find information from that. And we've been slowly trying to scan those and put them on our History Center website so that people can find them.
And you have a young man there who does all of this scanning. Is that his job?
Correct. Yeah, Chris Larley in our History Center.
Yes.
He's our digital resources librarian. So what he will do is he'll take, whether it's a photograph or it's a map, or even stuff out of the vertical files. He's been doing vertical files recently.
Really?
Or even oral histories. He will take all of that and he'll put it in one of a couple of places. So he'll have it indexed. It may be on our YouTube page, but it also may be on our digital collection page off our website. But searchable so people can find it. And so invariably, if you search and you come across an oral history, we did a whole big oral history collection, with Irish Americans based in Morristown.
Yes.
And it'll click you to a link out to our YouTube page for that.
Right. So when somebody comes in there and is a beginner, and they're sometimes overwhelmed or intimidated by a genealogy library, as I was years ago. Now I just go in there fighting. Okay. So they'll come to the front desk and what will they ask? I mean, they have to come with some kind of information.
Well, a lot of times people will just ask whatever they ask. So our staff is pretty adept at doing what's called the reference interview.
Yeah.
So if Stephen Conti comes in, they'll be like, well, what are you researching, Stephen? Where are you at in your research?
You call it a reference interview.
Yes.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah, so in other words, it's not, because a lot of times the first question somebody asks is, I'm looking for everything on the Conti family. And maybe you're really not looking at everything on the Conti family. Really what you're doing, you're trying to find this one great-grandparent, and you can't get that link. And that's what they are trained to sort of find out and work with people on. But they shouldn't be intimidated at all. When they come in, our staff is always incredibly helpful. We have a form that people fill out, and they'll ask a whole series of questions before people even get started.
Now, you also have another source, which I have used, city directories. And I see that you have the Morris County, for the whole county, from 1897 to 1909. You have that. That's what I read in this pamphlet. Okay, why, you have other information or what?
No, you're right.
All right. That's for Morris County.
Right.
And Morristown, 1885 to 1982. I thought they would go back further. The directories.
Keep in mind too that Morristown was not a highly populous place. A lot of the development in Morristown, obviously there was the encampment, during the Revolutionary War, but it was a tiny little village at that point. So really, once you have wealthy New Yorkers moving in and building mansions in the latter part of the 19th century.
And I've seen them in the neighborhood of your, are those still privately owned?
Some are, depends on what they are. So like the one at the Fairleigh Dickinson campus is obviously now part of Fairleigh Dickinson.
Right.
But there are others. There was one that just got sold recently. It's going to become a Pier 1, I believe. That's
really?
On Madison Avenue, yeah. So,
but in your neighborhood, and in the neighborhood of your library, I've seen these mansions.
Yeah, there's a few.
By the Episcopal Church, right down that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a few. One I think is a bank today.
Yeah.
So it depends. Some have gotten rehoused. A lot have gotten torn down.
Right. Now, in genealogy, we have what we call collections that individuals have put together. And Chad has many of these collections at the North Jersey History and Genealogy Center. And I'll just mention the most popular one, Henry Pilch. I had heard of Henry. I never met Mr. Pilch.
I never met him either.
But we have a pamphlet on what he covers here. Henry Pilch, and he has family history records from 1724 to 1986. And tell us about dear old Henry.
So Henry Pilch was a real estate lawyer.
Yeah.
And so what he would do is you'd go to him and like, oh, I'm buying this property or whatever.
Yeah.
And as a part of it, he would get very interested. And he'd come to our library. This is back 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And he would research the family. So at the point when he passed away, he not only had transaction of, Stephen, you were buying some kind of property, but like, oh, I'm really interested in the Conti family. And he'd look back and research.
Yeah.
We have about 300 boxes full of family information simply from his research that he did both in the courthouse and other places. And it's all just maintained. And so Jeff Moy, who's also on our History Center staff, processed the whole thing relatively recently just to provide access. So he did a pamphlet up. And let me just say that now that we have it processed with a little more access, we have genealogists using it all the time.
The Henry Pilch collection, it's priceless.
Yeah.
And what other collections do you have from individuals?
There's, again, like I said before, we have a collection. Sometimes people will give us like Bible records, photocopy Bible records from people. Other times we'll have collections from genealogists. We have a strong link with the Morris Genealogy Society. And so they will come in and actually do indexing projects with us. There's also a collection we have of a gentleman relatively recently who did a lot of cemetery research all around Morris County. So we got his papers. So there's a lot of things like that. So we always definitely try to connect with people that are doing research or have those relationships already. Like Pilch was coming to our library for years. The Morris Area Genealogy Society has been coming to our library for years. So
they're a wonderful society. I have spoken to them on 2 occasions, and they're always doing very interesting things. I think they're the most successful genealogy society that I know of. They do great PR, and they have wonderful programs and wonderful speakers. I know many of the people involved with that.
And they work with us hand in hand and will come and do indexing projects with us. So they will find things in our collections and say, oh, there should be more access to this. And they'll get their boots on the ground.
And they have many volunteers who do that work. And do they also do their programs in your library? They used to. I'm not sure.
Oh, a long time ago. They outgrew our space. They're so popular. So now they're at the Morris County Library on Hanover Avenue.
I spoke in both areas.
Oh, is that right?
I spoke in your library and the big one, the Morris. Now, do you have any dealings with the Morris County Library?
We share a lot of resources with them, so we're both in a library consortium with libraries all over the county. They have a small historical collection as well. Ours is much more genealogy focused and collecting papers and things like that, but they definitely have things as well. The advantage for the Morris County Library is their collection is just so much bigger. So overall, for overall library service.
And you know, many local libraries, smaller libraries all over will have a history and genealogy area. You know, in a small town, because the science of genealogy is America's #1 hobby. Well, in our case, it's a profession, but it's just amazing. Even my mechanic is doing genealogical. He's doing genealogical.
Well, he should be.
Right. Now let's talk about deeds, marriage records, church, and cemetery, and you have many of these as well. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so again, a lot of people will get initial things through different kinds of databases, but the one thing I'll say about deeds is a lot of times deeds don't show up on a lot of databases because they're voluminous. I mean, there are tons and tons of deeds because everybody always cared about who was owning land all throughout history. That's where the Pilch collection comes in really useful, particularly for our area. So a lot of times individual collections, but invariably you're going to a courthouse first for a lot of those. But sometimes there'll be guides and help as far as like doing research through our place. Church records are something that kind of exist everywhere, and it's not systematic. I think you did a program on churches a number of years ago.
Yes, I did, yes.
And so like you know by denomination, some denominations are great about keeping records, others aren't. Some have the records in the church, some have them at a central repository, some don't have them at all that type of thing. So we oftentimes have a lot of abstracts or published works about church records. But we also have sometimes we may end up with original church records as well, depending. So it's a very
And would that be the same thing with cemetery records?
Yeah, a lot of, there was a big, obviously the DAR is most known for a big transcription of cemetery stones that they did, I want to say it's like in the 20s, 30s, 40s, like around that time period. And then there is a man by the name of, I think his last name was Fraser, who did a whole bunch of transcriptions of cemeteries as well. And that's useful because sometimes you may go to an actual cemetery and the stone's not readable anymore.
Right.
So it's useful to find those transcriptions to see, all right, well, here's one done in 1924.
Yeah.
What does it say there? Here's
Yeah.
one done in 1966.
Yeah.
What did it say there, comparing and things like that.
And you also have the published works of the Genealogical Society of New Jersey.
We do.
Of which I was a trustee many years ago. And they are famous for copying cemeteries. I did that myself, okay, with my pumice stone. That was lots of fun. You just, very difficult to read, but they do publish them in the GSNJ, and you have all of those.
We have that. We not only have the state publication, but a lot of local historical societies or local genealogy societies will have publications too, and we subscribe to almost all the ones in New Jersey.
Right. Newspapers, you have many of the early newspapers of Morristown and surrounding areas.
Yep. And actually, one thing I wanted to mention about newspapers for you, Stephen, is
Yeah.
that a lot of times people will still have to use microfilm, particularly for like something like the Daily Record, because it just does not exist in a database,
Right.
or it's not been scanned. So a lot of times we help people out with that. A lot of the early papers, we have original copies of like things like the Jerseyman and things like that. And so we're actually in the midst of a project now of determining like how we can maybe scan some of those for access. It's going to be a massive project because we have a lot of them, but that's
So
part
there's
of
a lot of work to be done.
Yes.
Right.
And newspapers are so voluminous that that's why they have been done wholesale.
And I did mention the ethnic sources. You have books on the various how-to books. On there's one I think on African American.
There's one for everybody.
And so it's a library that reaches out to all. And then I did mention the published works. We mentioned Barbara Hoskins, who was a great genealogist, and the databases. We all use databases. Can you just rattle off the various databases?
Well, everybody
that you
knows
have there?
Ancestry, and we mentioned Fold 3 before.
Yeah.
Heritage Quest is another one that gets mentioned a lot.
Yeah.
We have a Jewish genealogy database that we also subscribe to, so a lot of people will use that. And I'll give you a little side note, is you never know who is scanned or done what. So we obviously do a lot of digitization even at our own library. You can find collections on our website.
Yeah.
I was researching I never found my grandparents' marriage record because I'm from Pennsylvania.
Right.
They were not married in Pennsylvania. I never found it. And I heard a rumor that apparently it was in Hagerstown, Maryland. Would you know that Washington County in Maryland had digitized all their marriage records?
Wonderful.
And you can go right to the county website and find it. So you never know who has done what.
Right. And then many things are on microfilm at your
Yep.
right. Do you work with the LDS Church? There's one in Morristown. They had a family history center. Do you ever work with them?
Not directly. A lot of times what we'll do is we may acquire film that they've published. And we'll definitely use their website. So that's another great website to go on, Family Search, to look at different things that they have scanned or digitized. They've done a good number of deeds, so that sometimes is very useful with that. But as far as working with them locally, we haven't almost needed to. We can utilize their sort of like nationwide services to a large extent.
Before we close, I do want to feature a book that Chad has written. It's his first book, but I'm sure he'll write more. Can you tell us about this book right here?
Sure. It's called That Our Daughters May Be as Cornerstones. It's a history of Irving College. So there was I grew up in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania.
Okay, Irving College is in?
Was in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay, great.
Yep. And when I was a graduate student in Boston, our local library has a original collection of student records and everything like that. So if you have genealogists that know, they're like, oh, I think my mother may have gone to this women's college, they would have had that information at the library, but there was never a secondary source published.
And that's what you did.
And that's what I did. So I did it in the 90s, and then I had a publisher contact me a couple of years ago and say, I can't believe this never was published. So I worked with him, Sunbury Press, which is really great. They publish all kind of local history stuff. So if you're doing kind of Pennsylvania history and things like that, they're a good place to look for that.
Well, you know, Chad, you're not far off base with this, because years ago I did a show called Alumni Sources. We looked at yearbooks, we looked at school records. sometimes a fraternity would have records.
Yep.
Okay. So it's very common, okay?
Yeah.
But I think you're the one that did the first one on these ladies right here.
Yeah, there was one a very small pamphlet that was written at the turn of the last century.
Right.
But that was the only other secondary source done. And it's great that you did a show about that.
Yes, I did. Yes,
because
I
there's
did.
a lot of untapped resources, particularly in smaller colleges. You could get quite a lot of information if you can get to the right person.
Now, also before we close, let's give our viewers some basic information. Hours and times. I know you're open 7 days a week or something.
We're open 7 days a week. We're only closed 13 days the whole year, so like the major holidays, more or less.
Yeah.
And our History Center is open all the hours that our library is open. So Monday to Thursday, 9 to 9.
Wow.
Friday and Saturday, 9 to 5, and Sunday, 1 to 5.
But you don't work all of those hours.
If I did, I would not be alive, yeah.
Yeah. So you have access to your ancestors all week long.
Well, that's true. Every day.
It's just amazing, yeah. And, you know, it's a wonderful library to go to. I've been there several times. I was there long before you came along. I think you were in grade school when I went there, up on the balcony. They put us up there. Now we're down below. And we have a wonderful, wonderful woman to thank for this great library. She lived to be about 102. She lived at Foster Fields.
Well, that's what it's called now, yep.
Which was owned by the grandson of Paul Revere. Joseph Revere was his name. And I guess her father bought that in the early 1900s.
Yeah, Caroline Foster, yes.
Caroline Foster. I never met her, but I saw a glimpse of her. And when I saw her, I saw Katharine Hepburn. You know.
Yeah, she was a remarkable woman.
Yes.
And at the time that she passed away, she donated money to the county to set up Foster Fields, which is a living history farm now.
Yes.
And also donated money for us to, because of Dorothy Hoskins' work, or Barbara Hoskins' work rather, to really congeal our history center and underwrote the history center. And so now our history center is the Caroline Rose Foster History Center.
That's another name for it. Caroline Rose.
We named it after her, yeah.
Say it once more.
Caroline Rose Foster.
Okay, so that's the subtitle of it. Is that the?
Yeah, that's exactly what the History Center, its name is now. That was a few years ago we renamed it for. So.
Yeah, so it's thank you, Carolyn, wherever you are. That was a great, and she loved history and she loved genealogy.
Well, and she worked a lot with Barbara Hoskins
on projects. Yes, they were very good, and neither one of those girls were Jersey girls.
No.
Barbara was a Hoosier from Indiana, and Carolyn, I believe, was born in New York and raised in Connecticut.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But they embraced New Jersey and they embraced Morris County. They just loved our state. Well, thank you so much, Chad.
Well, thank you,
Lina Weaver, I got it right. The director of the the Morris Township Public Library. Guess where? Morristown, New Jersey.
Yep.
And go there and you will meet Chad. And on that note, as I say all the time, remember, we are all descendants of ancient civilizations. Genealogy is your key to the history of your family. And so until next time, this is Stephen Conti wishing you the very best of luck in your research, and above all, happy ancestor hunting. Good night.